I was watering the geraniums on the balcony when the late afternoon light turned the leaves the color of old coins, and the city hummed below me like a distant engine. Robert loved these flowers. He said they were stubborn and cheerful, like me, and he would tap the clay pots each morning the way a musician tests a drum, listening for the little song of moisture inside. He has been gone for many years, and still I water them as if he might come whistling through the kitchen door, wiping his hands on a dish towel, asking me if I remembered to soak the beans. I tell myself to keep busy and keep moving, yet that day, when the phone rang and Kevin's name pulsed on the screen, I felt the way a bird must feel when a shadow passes overhead. I stood very still. I waited one beat, then another, because I have learned there are calls that heal and calls that unspool you. I pressed the green circle. "Mom," Kevin said, and I could hear a bright, practiced warmth in his voice, the smile he uses for clients, the one that used to be for me. "Tonight at 6, the Sterling Cut, the Gold Room. Jessica is treating the whole family. Be on time." He ended the call before I could speak. I stood there with the watering can tilting in my hand until cold water spilled across my shoes and traced a dark path to the balcony drain. Jessica treating the family. Those words felt like a coin balanced on its edge. I waited for it to fall one way or the other. In the years since their wedding, my daughter-in-law had cataloged the world by its labels and price tags, while cataloging me as an antique she did not want to display. I was old-fashioned, she said, which in her mouth meant dull. I was careful with food and money, which in her mind meant poor. I had long stories, which meant I took up space. The kitchen clock, the old regulator Robert bought at a flea market, marked the minutes with a wooden heartbeat. If I was to cross the city by bus, I would need to leave soon, and do it with my back straight and my hair smoothed, because I was raised to respect invitation and time. I set the watering can in the sink, wiped my shoes, and opened the bedroom wardrobe. The navy blazer waited on its hanger, smelling faintly of cedar blocks and old winter air. I brushed my white hair until it lay in a neat, soft wave, pressed color into my lips the way my mother taught me, and told the mirror that I was not a ghost in my own life. I locked the door at 5 with deliberate hands and tucked the keys into the little pocket in my bag where I keep things I cannot afford to lose. The buses were crowded. Summer heat lay across the city like an extra layer of clothing, and the air on the second bus held the smell of cologne and fried food and hot metal. No one offered me a seat, which is a small thing until you realize it is a measure of the world's temperature, and you understand that for many people the air has gone cold. I held the rail and balanced my weight and told my body, which has worked faithfully for nearly 7 decades, that we would arrive in dignity. The Sterling Cut stood with its brass doors like the entrance to a ship. Inside, the lobby gleamed with mirrors and a chandelier that looked like captured rain. The hostess smiled at me, then looked past me, the way people do when they are trained to greet money rather than guests. "The Gold Room," I said. "Mr. Kevin Vance." She checked her tablet and her smile faltered. "I am sorry," she said. "The party is seated, but your name is not listed." "My last name is Vance," I told her. "Kevin is my son." She checked again, the way you check a locked window even though you know it will not budge. "Perhaps call them," she said gently. My hand trembled as I dialed. The phone rang, and then Jessica answered with that bright edge she keeps for special cruelty. "Oh, Mom," she said, "this is just a small family dinner. We did not save a place for you. Go on home. We will call you next time." The line went dead. I stood beneath the chandelier in my neat navy blazer, while laughter spilled from the private rooms like steam. The hostess asked if I was all right. I told her I was, because a woman like me learns to sit up inside her pain and say she is fine. I pushed open the glass door and stepped into the wet light of evening. I had time then to make the first of many small decisions that would lead me where I needed to go. I could have walked to the bus stop and gone home to the leftovers in their white porcelain dishes, the portrait of Robert on the living room wall, the silence that can feel like a second skin. Instead, when my phone rang again, and Kevin's voice spilled out of it, full of party noise, telling me to come upstairs right away, I turned and went back through the brass doors. The hostess looked confused. "My son asked me to join them," I said, and I climbed the stairs, smoothing the blazer that had begun to wrinkle at the hem. At the Gold Room door I knocked softly, then harder. The door opened a slice and Jessica's face appeared, powdered and precise. She did not move aside. She held out a gold card as if she were passing me a napkin. "Mom," she said, "please go settle the bill. The pin is Kevin's birthday. We are finished here. Close the door when you are done." She shut me out without letting me see the room. I held the card the way you might hold a match, careful not to burn the fingers that must still do tomorrow's work. At the cashier's desk, the clerk swiped the card and frowned. "Insufficient funds," she said. "The total is $7,538. She showed me an itemized receipt where expensive words grew like weeds. 2 bottles of wine worth a month of groceries, seafood carried across cold oceans to be warmed for 1 hour of boasting, chocolate desserts as costly as winter coats. My pension is modest. I have saved carefully. I have helped when asked because I believed help given to your children is a kind of hand you extend to your younger self." I stood at the counter and felt old lessons buckle beneath my feet. I called Kevin. His voice was thick with celebration. "Use your card," he said, as if the solution were that simple, as if the money were not a body I had built over years of work into a small fence around my future. "It will be fine," he said. "You will get it back." He laughed the way a young man laughs when he has not stood on the far shore of his choices and watched the tide roll in. Then, in the background, Jessica asked why the old woman was taking so long, and the call ended with a click as soft and sharp as a blade. I paid with my own card because I could not bear to be the woman who argued with a cashier under a chandelier. Outside, night had deepened. The wind cut through my blazer and smelled of rain. I put the card back in my wallet, where it lay with a guilty weight. It would be easy to frame this as a single humiliation, to go home and build a story around it in which I was the martyr and they were the villains and nothing more could be done. But the truth held a longer spine. Last month they had asked for money to cover a business gap. Months before, for a car. Before that, for a child's birth expenses. Each time they used words that placed me inside a circle of duty and love. Each time I stepped into that circle and handed over the little I had. That night I walked toward an ATM with the gold card in my hand, and a decision forming at the base of my skull, a quiet and flinty yes to myself. I checked the balance. I read the transaction history. I learned what my son's life looked like when it was written down in numbers, which I translate into words because words carry breath. There were purchases that glittered, and appointments that promised status, and a steady river of deposits that traced back to a fund in my name. I stood under the pale light of the machine and thought about how theft can dress itself up as help, how love can be used like a credit card, swiped until the strip wears smooth. I thought about Robert's hands tapping the geranium pots and how careful he was with living things. I thought about my husband's voice, which lives now in the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock in certain corners of the house that hold him like a perfume. I thought, very simply, that I would not let the rest of my life become a hallway I had to tiptoe down. In the mirror of the ATM screen, I saw my face the way strangers see it, a tidy older woman in a navy blazer, but behind that a line of iron I had inherited from women who worked and saved and carried families across lean years. On the walk home, the city changed shape. It was still made of streets and shop windows and the slow river of cars, yet it also became a map of the choices I would make the next day. I would go to the bank and ask questions the way a good teacher asks them, clear and patient and unwilling to be hurried. I would find a lawyer and speak my story aloud. The parts that felt like shame were only facts, and facts, once spoken, can be arranged into defenses. I would open the drawer where I keep important documents, and I would not rearrange or soften anything for the sake of the children who used to be tender and are now hard in ways I cannot afford. At a crosswalk, I waited for the light and realized I was trembling, not from fear, but from the feeling that comes when you stand at the lip of a canyon and decide to climb down and cross and climb up again. The buses had stopped. The neighborhood streets were quiet and glowed with the light of television sets behind curtains. I let myself into the apartment. I did not turn on the overhead light. I waited for my eyes to adjust, and I sat in the room with Robert's photograph, which I had dusted that morning the way I do every Saturday, and I told him the truth. I told him about the restaurant and the bill and the card and the line Jessica spoke with her microphone smile. I told him about the balance and the purchases and the way shame wriggles like a snake when a mother admits what her child has done. Then I told him something more important. I told him I was going to stand up. Morning looked like caution and courage braided together. I woke before the alarm, the room still blue. I made coffee and buttered toast and ate both slowly, because the day would be long and because a ritual gives you a hand to hold when you are alone. I packed my purse with my identification, my passbook, my notebook, and the black pen that writes smooth and sure even on thin paper. I wore shoes I could walk in and a blouse that did not show sweat. At the bus stop, my neighbors clustered and spoke about small pains and weather and television, and I nodded, because there is comfort in small circles of talk, and because I had not yet learned that by evening I would have become someone else. The bank lobby was cool as a chapel. The young teller smiled with professional kindness and asked how she could help. I told her I needed to see the detailed statements for my pension account for the last 3 years. She typed with quick fingers. Her face changed in small ways as she read. She called the manager. We went into a little office that smelled of carpet cleaner and paper. They showed me pages where my name lived beside withdrawals I had not made and loans I had never seen. They showed me signatures that looked almost like mine but not quite, the way a stranger might almost look like a cousin until he smiles, and you see the teeth are wrong. They told me I could report it. They told me they would help. They told me there were cameras and copies and procedures that would become a net if I let them. I held the papers carefully, as if they might crack. I felt an old ache rise in my chest, the one a mother learns when she realizes she cannot carry a child across certain rivers because that child has waded into the middle and is laughing as the current pulls at his knees. The manager asked if I was all right. I told him I was and I was not, and that both could be true at the same time. Outside, sun hammered the sidewalk. I walked without seeing the storefronts. I sat on a park bench and read the pages again and felt myself become heavier and steadier, as if the facts were stones I was placing in my pockets so the wind could not move me. When the phone rang, it was Kevin asking for money for a doctor's deposit for the younger child, and I said his name and then said no. It was a small word. It was also a key that unlocked a door I did not know I had closed. I went home. I opened the drawer where I keep envelopes. I wrote the date in clear block letters at the top of the first page and began to write what had happened, not as a lament but as a record. I listed every loan and gift and promise I could recall. I wrote down every sentence that had pressed me into compliance. I drew a small square in the corner where I would later paste copies and receipts, and the business card of a lawyer whose name I did not yet know. As the words piled up, I felt the room change temperature. It did not grow warmer or colder. It grew honest. When the light faded and the clock ticked into evening, I placed the notebook in my purse and set it by the door so that in the morning I could walk straight out into whatever waited. I washed the coffee cup and set it upside down on the dish towel. I watered the geraniums. I stood on the balcony and let the city's breath move across my face. I promised myself I would not be quiet again. The next morning began with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. The air in my apartment felt dense, as though it knew I was about to tear open the fabric of the quiet life I had been living. I dressed simply, pulled my hair back, and slipped the notebook into my purse. The world outside smelled of coffee and wet pavement. People moved quickly, heads down, hurrying to jobs, errands, lives that, for all I knew, were perfectly ordinary. I had not felt ordinary in years. At the law office, I sat in a waiting room decorated with framed diplomas and photographs of smiling couples who looked as if justice had returned their breath. When my name was called, a woman with steady eyes and soft gray curls greeted me. Clara Hartman, attorney at law, her nameplate read. She invited me to sit and asked how she could help. Her voice was kind but not fragile, and that difference mattered. I opened my purse, removed the notebook, and began to tell her everything. I told her about the dinners, the loans, the missing funds, the night at the restaurant. I told her about Jessica's tone, the bank records, the forged signatures. When I finished, my hands were trembling, but the words had come out clean, as though I had scrubbed them free of shame. Clara listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in blue ink that matched the color of her eyes. When I was done, she leaned back and said, "Mrs. Vance, what your son and daughter-in-law have done is fraud. You have rights, and we can pursue them." For a moment I felt both relief and terror. Pursue. The word carried a sound like footsteps echoing through a hallway. I asked what would happen next. She explained in patient detail an investigation, filings, hearings, subpoenas. She said it would not be quick or simple, but it would be possible. And possibility, after years of silence, was a gift. That night, I did not sleep. I listened to the refrigerator hum, the pipes knock, the wind move against the windows. I thought of Kevin as a little boy, his hair sticking up in every direction, his laughter spilling over breakfast cereal. I tried to connect that child to the man who had signed my name without permission, but the line between them was blurred, like a photograph left in the sun too long. I felt sorrow, but beneath it, a slow, rising anger. Not the kind that consumes, but the kind that clears a path. Days became weeks. Clara called often. The bank confirmed irregular transactions. Signatures were analyzed. Letters arrived in thick envelopes stamped with my name. Each time, I read them carefully, learning the language of justice, petition, affidavit, deposition words that sounded heavy but precise. My world, once confined to the kitchen, the garden, the grocery store, expanded into corridors of law and truth. I attended meetings, answered questions, produced documents. Each small step pulled me further from the woman who had once whispered apologies to a phone. Then came the day when Kevin and Jessica learned I had filed a complaint. The call came late in the afternoon. Kevin's voice was sharp, frantic. "Mom, how could you do this to us? We're family." I listened, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "You did this to yourself," I said. "I'm just telling the truth." He began to shout, but I ended the call before the words could reach me. My hand trembled afterward, but not from fear, from the realization that I had taken back the power he thought he owned. 2 days later, a black SUV parked outside my building. 2 social workers stepped out with clipboards, followed by Jessica in dark glasses. She had filed a report claiming I was mentally unfit, that I suffered from confusion and paranoia. They asked to come inside. I let them. They inspected the apartment, asked me to list the date, the president, the day of the week. I answered each question slowly, clearly, with the tone of a woman grading an exam. When they left, I called Clara, who told me not to worry. False claims often arise when truth begins to surface. Still, fear pressed close that night. I packed a small bag with essentials, papers, medications, the notebook, and kept it by the door just in case. The next morning, when I went to buy groceries, I noticed Jessica's car idling at the end of the street. She did not get out, but the message was clear. They wanted me to back down. Instead, I began writing everything again, times, dates, names. The act of writing steadied me, as if each word drove a nail into the foundation of my resolve. Weeks later, Clara called with news. The evidence was solid. The bank had verified forgery, and an investigator had traced the misused funds to an account under Jessica's maiden name. The district attorney would press charges. I sat at my table, the afternoon light falling across the pages of my notebook, and let the truth sink in. It was not victory yet, but it was justice beginning to breathe. Court day arrived like a storm after drought. I wore a simple gray dress and carried my notebook as if it were armor. Kevin sat across the aisle, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding mine. Jessica looked polished and cold. When the judge entered, the room hushed. Clara spoke with calm authority, presenting documents, statements, recordings of phone calls where Kevin's voice revealed more than he intended. I sat still, listening as my life was retold in facts and numbers, stripped of emotion, yet heavy with it all the same. Then came my turn to speak. Clara asked me simple questions. I answered with truth, my voice steady. When I described the restaurant and the gold card, I saw a flicker in Kevin's face, a memory he could not erase. I spoke of the night I discovered the missing funds, the hours spent writing, the moment I chose not to be silent. The courtroom was silent except for my voice and the scratch of pens. When the verdict came, it was as if the air changed color. The judge ruled in my favor. Restitution would be made. Fraud confirmed. My accounts restored. Kevin and Jessica would face charges and mandatory counseling. The gavel struck once, a sound both final and freeing. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Outside, the sky was bright, impossibly wide. Clara smiled and said, "You did it, Mrs. Vance." But I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "We did it. Truth did it." That evening, I walked home through streets that felt new. The geraniums waited on the balcony, their red petals catching the sunset. I watered them, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. I thought of Robert, of how he had always believed strength could bloom in the most ordinary soil. I whispered his name to the wind, and felt, for the first time, that he heard me. In the following weeks, I began volunteering at a community center that offered legal guidance to elderly people. I told my story to those who felt voiceless, and each time I did, I saw recognition flicker in their eyes. Betrayal, I learned, is common, but so is courage. The center grew, word spread, and people began calling it the Silver Sentinel, a place where no one's silence could be stolen. Kevin wrote me once, from a rehabilitation program. He apologized, said he had been lost in ambition and pride. I did not answer immediately. Forgiveness, I learned, is like replanting a garden. You must clear the weeds first, let the soil rest. Months later, I sent him a short letter. I told him I hoped he would learn what true wealth is, and that I wished him peace. I signed it simply, Mom. The night I mailed the letter, I stood again on my balcony. The city stretched beneath me, restless and alive. The geraniums swayed in the wind, strong and scarlet. I realized then that justice is not a single moment in a courtroom. It is a way of standing up, day after day, even when your legs tremble. It is watering the flowers you once thought had withered. It is knowing that your voice, once found, can never be silenced again. Some weeks later, the morning sun slanted through the kitchen blinds, painting soft golden lines across the table. My life had quieted, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was clean, like the air after rain. The phone rang, and for the first time in a long while, I did not flinch when I saw an unfamiliar number. It was a young woman from the community center, her voice warm, asking if I would speak at a local gathering about financial awareness for seniors. I hesitated, not because I was afraid, but because I had spent so many years being silent that I needed to be sure my voice would not tremble. Then I said yes. The day of the event, I dressed in that same navy blazer I had worn to the restaurant the night my world cracked open. I pinned a small silver brooch on the lapel, shaped like a flower. It had belonged to my mother. She used to say that courage, like any flower, needed light to bloom. I carried a small card with notes, though I knew I would not read from it. When I arrived at the center, the room was filled with faces, older men and women, some with canes, some with folded arms, all carrying the same quiet fatigue I once wore. There were younger volunteers, too, and I thought, how strange and wonderful that pain could bring generations together. When the director introduced me, there was polite applause. I stepped to the small podium, took a breath, and began. My name is Eleanor Vance, I said, and I used to believe that love and loyalty were enough to keep a family safe. I learned the hard way that love needs boundaries, and trust needs proof. A murmur moved through the audience, the kind of sound that means people understand. I told them about the restaurant, the bill, the gold card. I told them about the forged documents, the court, the victory. But mostly, I told them about the night I stood in my kitchen and decided to stop being afraid. I don't share this story for pity, I said, but for warning and for hope. Betrayal can come from the people closest to us, but so can the strength to stand again. We are never too old to start over. We are never too late to learn. The room was silent. I could hear only the low hum of the air conditioner. And then someone in the front row, a woman with silver hair and trembling hands, whispered, "Thank you." After the event, people came to speak with me. One man said his daughter had pressured him into signing documents he didn't understand. Another woman confessed she was too embarrassed to tell anyone her son had emptied her savings. I listened, and as they spoke, I realized that my pain had turned into something useful. It was no longer a wound, it was a light, and it was guiding others out of darkness. Clara joined me at the center that evening. She smiled as she watched me talk with the crowd. "You've found your calling," she said. "You're helping people see that justice doesn't retire." I laughed softly. "I suppose I am," I said. "Though sometimes I still wake up expecting the old fear to return." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "That fear will fade," she said. "What remains is what you've built in its place." In the weeks that followed, I began writing short pieces for the center's newsletter, simple lessons about protecting one's rights, understanding bank statements, recognizing manipulation. I wrote them in plain language so no one would feel small for not knowing. Each article began with a truth I had learned through pain. If they love you, they will not ask you to choose between kindness and security. One afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was familiar but uncertain, as if the writer had practiced many times before putting pen to paper. It was from Kevin. He wrote that he was working with a counselor, that he had begun volunteering at a shelter, that he was sober. He said he did not expect forgiveness, only understanding. "I used to think you were weak, Mom," he wrote, "because you always gave. Now I see you were stronger than I ever understood." I sat with that letter for a long while. The pain of betrayal does not vanish. It becomes part of the story you tell yourself when you measure who you have become. I took out a new sheet of paper and wrote back. I told him I believed in redemption, that it begins not with excuses but with change. I told him I wished him peace, and that when he was ready to see me as a son, not a victim or an adversary, my door would be open. I signed it not as Mrs. Vance or Mother, but simply Eleanor, because the woman I had become deserved her own name. Months passed, seasons changed. The geraniums bloomed, then wilted, then bloomed again. Life settled into something steady. Every morning, I opened the curtains and greeted the light. Sometimes the quiet carried Robert's memory, and sometimes it carried my own voice, steady and sure. I no longer measured time by loss but by small victories, the smile of a neighbor I had helped, a phone call from someone I once guided through the same maze I had escaped. One Sunday, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Kevin standing there. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his posture was no longer defensive. He held a small pot of geraniums, their petals red as the ones on my balcony. "I thought maybe you'd like another," he said. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. Then I stepped aside and said, "Come in, Kevin." We sat at the table, the one where I had once written notes for court and letters of pain. Now it held 2 cups of coffee and the slow, careful rebuilding of something that had almost died. He told me about his work, about his children, about Jessica leaving. He cried once, quietly, and I placed my hand over his. "You hurt me deeply," I said, "but I have learned that forgiveness is not forgetting. It's letting go of the weight so you can both walk forward." When he left, he hugged me, not like a son seeking approval, but like a man who finally saw the person in front of him. After he was gone, I watered the new geranium and watched the sunlight catch on the leaves. I realized that my life had come full circle, not back to what it was, but to what it was meant to become. That night, as the city lights flickered below and the soft wind moved through the curtains, I spoke aloud to the empty room. "Robert," I said, "we did it. I am all right." And for the first time, I believed it. Because strength is not the absence of pain. It is the choice to stand, to speak, to keep watering the flowers even when the world has tried to bury your roots. I had learned that justice is not only what happens in a courtroom, it is what blooms afterward, quietly, persistently, in the hearts that refuse to wither. And so I lived, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as something simpler and stronger, a woman who finally came home to herself. Kevin began to visit every Sunday. At first, he stayed only for coffee, leaving before the afternoon shadows reached the balcony. Then he started helping with errands, fixing the squeaky cabinet door, carrying groceries, trimming the balcony plants the way Robert used to do. We did not talk about the trial anymore. We talked about the garden, about the weather, about small things that carry the weight of peace. One evening, he brought his children. Little Sarah ran straight to the flowers, touching every petal with wonder. Michael Jr., taller now, asked if he could help water them. Watching them laugh in the fading light, I felt something shift quietly inside me. The old hurt, though never gone, began to dissolve, not through forgetting but through the steady rhythm of life continuing. Kevin stood by the railing, watching his children. "They've missed you," he said softly. I looked at him and replied, "I've missed them too." After they left, I sat at the table and thought about time, how it bends, how it softens sharp edges when you let it. The notebook where I had once written my pain still lay in the drawer, but now its pages had become lessons. I had written a new entry that morning, not about loss or anger, but about growth. I wrote, "Healing is not a single act. It is a series of quiet choices." Months later, Clara invited me to join her on a small campaign for elder rights awareness. We traveled to nearby towns, speaking in libraries and community halls. Each time, people came forward with stories, different faces, same patterns of betrayal, same hunger for dignity. I told them what I had learned. That silence helps no one. That truth spoken aloud can rebuild the broken. One woman, after hearing me, hugged me tightly and said, "You gave me permission to fight for myself." I carried her words like a medal. The project grew faster than any of us expected. Local news outlets began to cover our meetings. The Silver Sentinel Alliance became a recognized name, not just a small community effort, but a movement. Young volunteers came to help seniors review their finances, teach them how to recognize scams, and simply listen. Each time I walked into that space and saw rows of people talking, learning, reclaiming control, I felt the kind of pride that no courtroom victory could ever match. Still, every so often, I returned to the restaurant district, walking past the Sterling Cut. The gold letters above the door had dulled with time, but they still caught the light in a way that made them look almost kind. I never went inside again. I would stop across the street, watching strangers enter laughing, unaware of the story that once unfolded behind those walls. And every time, I smiled not with bitterness, but with gratitude. That place had been the beginning of my end, and my end had been the beginning of my real life. On one particular afternoon, I saw an elderly couple leaving the restaurant, the husband holding his wife's coat, their laughter spilling onto the sidewalk. For a moment, I felt a pang of memory. Robert's hand on my arm, his voice telling me to lift my chin, his belief that kindness could outlast cruelty. I whispered to the wind, "You were right, my love." Years passed, and the city changed, but my little apartment remained a small sanctuary. The balcony filled with plants, geraniums, lavender, basil, even a small lemon tree that Kevin and the children had given me for my 75th birthday. Sometimes neighbors stopped by to chat, and the air smelled of tea and sunlight. Life had become a gentle rhythm, mornings of volunteering, afternoons of letters and reading, evenings of music and memory. One night, Sarah, now a young woman, came to visit alone. She was studying social work, inspired, she said, by what she had seen at the center. We sat together watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. "Grandma," she said, "how did you know when to stop being angry?" I smiled. "You don't stop being angry, my dear," I told her. "You just stop letting anger make your choices. You start choosing peace again and again until it becomes your nature." She nodded thoughtfully, her eyes glimmering with tears she didn't try to hide. "I hope I can be like you someday." I reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You already are," I said. After she left, I sat in the fading light, thinking of how far that frightened, humiliated woman at the restaurant had come. I thought about the voices I had helped, the lives that had changed, the family that had healed, not perfectly, but honestly. The clock ticked softly. The air smelled of soil and flowers. And for the first time in decades, I realized that I no longer waited for life to be fair. I had learned to make it fair, in small, steady ways. When I went to bed, I left the window open. The city's heartbeat drifted in the murmur of cars, the laughter of distant strangers, the hum of everything still possible. I whispered a simple prayer of thanks not to any god in particular, but to the courage that had finally come home to me. If anyone ever tells my story, I hope they understand that justice did not end in a courtroom. It began in the quiet moment a woman decided to stop apologizing for existing. It continued in every voice that rose after mine. It lives now in every person who refuses to shrink, who waters their geraniums, and remembers that even fragile things can bloom again. And when I am gone, I hope someone will keep these plants alive. Not because they are beautiful, though they are, but because they carry proof that resilience can take root anywhere on a balcony, in a broken heart, in a life rebuilt from silence into song. As the years went on, I noticed that the city's rhythm slowed to match mine. The mornings came softer, and the evenings stayed longer. My hair had turned completely white, my hands carried the map of time, and yet there was something new behind my eyes' clarity, not just of sight but of peace. I often sat by the window, notebook open, writing small reflections I never planned to publish. I called them my letters to the wind. One letter began like this. If someone had told me, on the night I paid that cruel restaurant bill, that I would one day thank the pain, I would have laughed. But pain, like fire, can destroy or forge. It depends on what you let it touch first, your fear or your faith. I read those words aloud to myself, smiling at the thought that I had once believed my voice was too small to matter. Kevin continued to visit often. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now carried humility. He had built a simple life repairing houses and volunteering at the same center I helped create. Sometimes, we would speak on panels together, mother and son, sharing our story as both warning and redemption. He often began by saying, "I thought I ruined my mother's life. Turns out, she saved mine." Each time he said it, I saw tears in the audience, and I felt Robert somewhere nearby, proud. Jessica never returned. I heard, through Kevin, that she had moved to another city, remarried, started over. I wished her peace too, in the private way you wish good weather for someone traveling far away. Hatred, I had learned, is just another kind of leash, and I had no desire to be tethered again. The Silver Sentinel Alliance grew beyond anything we imagined. It spread across states, run by volunteers who carried our message forward, that dignity has no age, that wisdom deserves protection. Younger people joined too: students, lawyers, ordinary neighbors, learning that justice is not charity but shared humanity. One afternoon, they unveiled a plaque in my honor at the center. It read, "For Eleanor Vance, who turned her wounds into wings." I stood there with Kevin beside me, my hand resting on the polished metal, and for a long time, I could not speak. Later that evening, we walked home together. The streets glowed with autumn leaves. Kevin carried the plaque under his arm, careful not to scratch it. "You know," he said, "when I was a kid, I thought you were invincible. When I grew up, I thought you were naive. Now I see you were just real." I laughed softly. "That's the best thing any mother could be," I said. Life, in its gentle persistence, kept moving. Seasons folded into each other, each leaving a trace. Some nights, I would sit on the balcony wrapped in a shawl, the city lights below flickering like memories. I would imagine Robert sitting beside me, his hand warm over mine. I would tell him about Sarah's new job, about Michael Jr.'s college plans, about how the lemon tree had finally borne fruit. I would tell him that love, real love, does not end, it only changes its shape. One spring evening, the air thick with the smell of rain and blossoms, I hosted a small dinner at home. Kevin, the grandchildren, Clara, and a few volunteers from the center gathered around my modest table. We ate, laughed, and shared stories. At one point, Sarah lifted her glass and said, "To Grandma Eleanor, who taught us that courage has no expiration date." Everyone clinked glasses. I smiled, but I did not speak, because gratitude can be louder than words. After they left, I washed the dishes slowly, humming an old tune Robert used to love. I stepped out onto the balcony one last time that night. The air was cool, the sky scattered with stars. The geraniums glowed faintly in the moonlight. I whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, but to life itself for the pain, the lessons, the second chances. In the days that followed, I found myself writing less and simply living more. I walked to the market every morning, greeting the same vendors, buying the same bread. People in the neighborhood began calling me the Lady of the Flowers. Sometimes they stopped to ask for advice, sometimes they just wanted to sit beside me and talk. I listened, always, because I knew how much a listening ear can change a life. On my 80th birthday, the community center organized a celebration. I didn't expect much, but when I arrived, I saw dozens of faces, people whose lives had intersected with mine through stories, advocacy, and kindness. The room was filled with laughter, and on one wall someone had hung a photo of me watering my geraniums. Beneath it were the words, "Justice begins at any age." That night, back at home, I looked at the city lights one last time before going to bed. The wind brushed through the curtains like a sigh, soft and familiar. I closed my notebook for the final time, not because the story was over, but because it was complete. If anyone ever reads these words after I am gone, I hope they understand what I learned too late but lived just in time. That the world will test you, break you, strip you bare, but somewhere inside every quiet, tired soul, there is still the voice that can rise and say, "Enough." That love is not blind obedience. It is the courage to demand truth. That age does not end purpose, it reveals it. And above all, that even after betrayal, even after humiliation, life waits patiently ready for you to open the window, let in the air, and begin again. Because healing, like the geraniums on my balcony, never happens all at once. It happens petal by petal, morning by morning, until one day you wake up and realize, you have bloomed. As the years went on, I noticed that the city's rhythm slowed to match mine. The mornings came softer, and the evenings stayed longer. My hair had turned completely white, my hands carried the map of time, and yet there was something new behind my eyes, clarity, not just of sight, but of peace. I often sat by the window, notebook open, writing small reflections I never planned to publish. I called them my letters to the wind. One letter began like this. If someone had told me, on the night I paid that cruel restaurant bill, that I would one day thank the pain, I would have laughed. But pain, like fire, can destroy or forge. It depends on what you let it touch first, your fear or your faith. I read those words aloud to myself, smiling at the thought that I had once believed my voice was too small to matter. Kevin continued to visit often. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now carried humility. He had built a simple life repairing houses and volunteering at the same center I helped create. Sometimes, we would speak on panels together, mother and son, sharing our story as both warning and redemption. He often began by saying, "I thought I ruined my mother's life. Turns out she saved mine." Each time he said it, I saw tears in the audience, and I felt Robert somewhere nearby, proud. Jessica never returned. I heard, through Kevin, that she had moved to another city, remarried, started over. I wished her peace too, in the private way you wish good weather for someone traveling far away. Hatred, I had learned, is just another kind of leash, and I had no desire to be tethered again. The Silver Sentinel Alliance grew beyond anything we imagined. It spread across states, run by volunteers who carried our message forward, that dignity has no age, that wisdom deserves protection. Younger people joined too, students, lawyers, ordinary neighbors, learning that justice is not charity but shared humanity. One afternoon, they unveiled a plaque in my honor at the center. It read, "For Eleanor Vance, who turned her wounds into wings." I stood there with Kevin beside me, my hand resting on the polished metal, and for a long time I could not speak. Later that evening, we walked home together. The streets glowed with autumn leaves. Kevin carried the plaque under his arm, careful not to scratch it. "You know," he said, "when I was a kid, I thought you were invincible. When I grew up, I thought you were naive. Now I see you were just real." I laughed softly. "That's the best thing any mother could be," I said. Life, in its gentle persistence, kept moving. Seasons folded into each other, each leaving a trace. Some nights, I would sit on the balcony wrapped in a shawl, the city lights below flickering like memories. I would imagine Robert sitting beside me, his hand warm over mine. I would tell him about Sarah's new job, about Michael Jr.'s college plans, about how the lemon tree had finally borne fruit. I would tell him that love, real love, does not end, it only changes its shape. One spring evening, the air thick with the smell of rain and blossoms, I hosted a small dinner at home. Kevin, the grandchildren, Clara, and a few volunteers from the center gathered around my modest table. We ate, laughed, and shared stories. At one point, Sarah lifted her glass and said, "To Grandma Eleanor, who taught us that courage has no expiration date." Everyone clinked glasses. I smiled, but I did not speak, because gratitude can be louder than words. After they left, I washed the dishes slowly, humming an old tune Robert used to love. I stepped out onto the balcony one last time that night. The air was cool, the sky scattered with stars. The geraniums glowed faintly in the moonlight. I whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to life itself for the pain, the lessons, the second chances. In the days that followed, I found myself writing less and simply living more. I walked to the market every morning, greeting the same vendors, buying the same bread. People in the neighborhood began calling me the Lady of the Flowers. Sometimes they stopped to ask for advice, sometimes they just wanted to sit beside me and talk. I listened, always, because I knew how much a listening ear can change a life. On my 80th birthday, the community center organized a celebration. I didn't expect much, but when I arrived, I saw dozens of faces, people whose lives had intersected with mine through stories, advocacy, and kindness. The room was filled with laughter, and on one wall, someone had hung a photo of me watering my geraniums. Beneath it were the words, "Justice begins at any age." That night, back at home, I looked at the city lights one last time before going to bed. The wind brushed through the curtains like a sigh, soft and familiar. I closed my notebook for the final time, not because the story was over, but because it was complete. If anyone ever reads these words after I am gone, I hope they understand what I learned too late but lived just in time. That the world will test you, break you, strip you bare, but somewhere inside every quiet, tired soul, there is still the voice that can rise and say, "Enough." That love is not blind obedience, it is the courage to demand truth. That age does not end purpose, it reveals it. And above all, that even after betrayal, even after humiliation, life waits patiently ready for you to open the window, let in the air, and begin again. Because healing, like the geraniums on my balcony, never happens all at once. It happens petal by petal, morning by morning, until one day you wake up and realize you have bloomed. Some nights now I wake before dawn and simply watch the light come in. It slides across the floorboards the way it always has, gentle and patient, and I think, this is what a full life feels like. It is not loud, it is not perfect, it is steady. Kevin calls most mornings. Sometimes it's to ask about a recipe from his childhood, sometimes just to tell me a joke the grandchildren made up. The sound of his voice, honest and unguarded, is proof that even the most damaged things can heal if you give them air. The community center has new volunteers. I go once a week now, mostly to listen. The younger ones run the workshops. I sit by the window, my notebook in my lap, answering questions when someone asks. When new visitors arrive, nervous or ashamed, someone always tells them, "Talk to Eleanor. She knows." They sit beside me, and I let them speak until their fear begins to loosen its grip. One woman came last month. Her son had convinced her to sign over her house, promising he'd take care of her. He hadn't. She trembled as she told me. I reached for her hand. "You're not alone," I said. "You have more power than you think." Later, when she walked out to meet the lawyer the center had arranged, I saw the way her shoulders had lifted, and I recognized that movement. It was the same way I had stood once, years ago, when I decided to fight back. The lemon tree on my balcony is taller now. Some mornings Sarah comes with her little girl to pick fruit. They laugh as they reach for the branches, and I feel the circle of time closing gently, like a promise kept. The child always waves at the flowers when she leaves. "Goodbye, Grandma's brave plants," she says. I laugh every time, but she's right, they are brave. So am I. One afternoon, as I was reading by the window, Kevin came in quietly. "I brought you something," he said. It was a framed newspaper clipping the Silver Sentinel Alliance celebrating its 20th year. My picture was small at the corner, surrounded by dozens of faces. "They wanted me to tell you that they're dedicating the new outreach program in your name," he said. I couldn't speak. Instead, I looked at him, the man my son had become, and nodded. After he left, I stood on the balcony again. The air smelled of earth and rain. I thought of everyone who had walked through my life, the people I had loved, the ones who had hurt me, the strangers who had become family. All of them had shaped me into this quiet, steady woman who could still stand tall in her twilight years. I whispered to the wind, the same way I used to speak to Robert. "You see, my love, the story didn't end in pain. It ended in peace. And maybe, one day, long after I'm gone, someone will find my notebook and read the words written there not as tragedy but as testimony. They'll understand that even in betrayal there can be rebirth, that even after loss there is room for light. Because life, in all its imperfection, is still generous. Because courage, once found, never leaves. Because justice, once spoken, keeps echoing. And because somewhere, on a small balcony overlooking the city, the geraniums will keep blooming, proof that no matter how long the winter lasts, spring always finds its way home. One evening near the end of that spring, I sat outside with a cup of tea, the city lights blinking awake below me. The air smelled of orange blossoms and wet concrete. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. I looked at the rows of geraniums, thick, strong, each stem holding its red crown steady against the night breeze, and thought how much they reminded me of every person I had ever met who refused to give up. A soft knock came at the door. When I opened it, I found Sarah and her little girl Emma smiling shyly. "We were walking home from the park," Sarah said. Emma wanted to see the flowers. They stepped inside, the little one running straight to the balcony, pressing her nose to the petals. "They're still brave," she said. And I laughed so hard tears ran down my cheeks. After they left, I sat a while longer in the doorway, the apartment glowing in the half-light. I thought about the many versions of myself that had lived here, the young wife who believed in forever, the widow who learned the language of loneliness, the mother who had to fight for justice, the woman who finally found peace. They were all still inside me, woven together, each one handing the next a lesson and a bit of strength. The next morning, I woke early and wrote one last note for my notebook. When love returns, it never looks the same, but it always finds its way back. Then I tucked the book inside the drawer where I kept my most precious things: the brooch from my mother, a photograph of Robert by the river, a single dried petal from the first geranium I ever planted. The years that followed were gentle. Kevin remarried to a kind woman named Elise, and together they built a quiet, decent life. Sarah graduated and began working full-time at the Alliance. Michael Jr. became a teacher. Sometimes, the three of them came over on Sundays, and we'd eat lemon cake under the awning, the same way Robert and I used to do. There was laughter again, but it was softer now, wiser. One afternoon, I looked around the table, at all those faces, and realized something simple. This was the life I had fought for, not the perfect one I'd once imagined, but the true one. A life with honesty, with earned love, with peace that didn't have to be loud to be real. When they left that evening, I stood at the door and watched them walk down the street, their silhouettes fading into the golden light. I turned back inside and felt that familiar stillness settle around me, but this time it was not loneliness, it was contentment. Later, as twilight deepened, I poured the last of my tea and stepped out onto the balcony. The flowers swayed in the soft wind. The city murmured below, alive and endless. I closed my eyes and breathed in. If anyone were listening that night, if the wind could carry words farther than sound, I would have said, it was worth it, every moment, every wound, every sunrise. Because in the end, what matters is not how much you lost, but how much you grew from it. Not how loudly you were hurt, but how quietly you learned to heal. And long after I'm gone, when someone new moves into this little apartment and steps out to water the flowers, perhaps they'll pause, just for a second, and feel it, the quiet pulse of life that refuses to fade. The whisper of a woman who once chose courage over silence. The soft promise that, no matter what happens, hope will always find a way to bloom again. The seasons turned again, as they always do, and I learned to measure time not by calendars but by the rhythm of the garden. When the air grew crisp and the geraniums began to pale, I covered them with cloth at night. When the rains returned, I opened the balcony door wide and let the wind sweep through the rooms. The scent of damp earth would fill the apartment, and I would stand there, breathing it in, feeling utterly alive. Each morning I walked to the corner bakery. The owner, a kind young man with tired eyes, always greeted me with, "Good morning, Miss Eleanor," and tucked an extra roll into my bag. Sometimes I stopped at the park afterward, sitting beneath the same oak tree where Kevin used to play as a boy. Children still ran in circles there, shouting the same songs, chasing the same dreams. Watching them, I realized that life does not change as much as it circles back, offering the same lessons to new hearts. I had begun keeping a new notebook, not of pain or reflection, but of gratitude. Every day I wrote one line. Some days it was simple. The tea was perfect this morning. Other days it was profound. I forgave myself for staying silent so long. These little sentences became the heartbeat of my days. The Silver Sentinel Alliance grew even larger. Young faces filled the offices now, bright and determined. Sarah had become one of its directors, and she often called to ask for advice. "You taught us to listen first," she said once, "and that's what makes it work." When I visited, they showed me a mural on the wall, a great silver tree with hundreds of leaves, each leaf bearing the name of someone the Alliance had helped. Near the roots was my name. I stood before it for a long while, tracing the painted veins with my fingertips. At home, the lemon tree had ripened again. The fruit hung low, their scent sharp and sweet. I sent some to the center, along with a note, "For the hands that keep hope alive." One evening, Sarah and Kevin came by with dinner. We ate together, laughing over old stories. When the dishes were cleared, Sarah took my hand. "Grandma," she said softly, "we're naming the new outreach wing after you. It's going to be called Eleanor's Light." I didn't speak for a long time. I looked at the two of them, my son, my granddaughter, and felt the weight of every year lift from me. "Eleanor's Light," I repeated and smiled. It sounds like something that should shine quietly, but forever. That night, after they left, I wrote my final entry in the gratitude book. I kept it brief, because there was nothing left to add. Today, I saw love made whole again. When I went to bed, I left the curtains open. The city glowed outside, the stars faint but steady. The lemon tree's branches brushed the window in the wind, and the petals from the geraniums drifted to the floor like soft red confetti. I thought of Robert, of the long road that had carried me here, of the people I had helped and the ones who had helped me in return. Sleep came easily. I dreamed of a wide field full of flowers, every color, every scent, endless in every direction. I was walking through it barefoot, the grass cool beneath my feet. Ahead of me, I saw a figure turning toward me, smiling, his hand outstretched. "You took your time," Robert said in that gentle voice I remembered. I laughed, light and free. "I had things to finish," I told him. He nodded. "You finished them beautifully." When the sun rose over the city the next morning, the light poured through the open curtains and fell across the chair by the balcony. The tea kettle whistled softly, and the wind moved through the flowers, carrying their scent out into the world. And though no one was there to see it, if you listened closely, you could almost hear the echo of a voice, calm, strong, unbroken, whispering what had become the truth of my life. It is never too late. Not for love, not for courage, not for peace. Outside, the geraniums gleamed red in the sunlight, blooming brighter than ever, their petals lifting toward the sky as if they knew they were the proof that even after the hardest winter, the heart can always find its way back to spring. The city woke slowly that morning, wrapped in gold light. The air was gentle, carrying the scent of rain from the night before. On the small balcony above the street, the geraniums stood tall, their red petals trembling softly in the breeze. Inside, the apartment was quiet. A cup of tea sat half-finished on the table beside a notebook tied with a piece of string. On the cover, in careful handwriting, were the words "Letters to the Wind." Kevin arrived first. He let himself in with the spare key, calling softly, "Mom?" There was no answer. He found her in her favorite chair by the window, shawl over her shoulders, her head tilted as if she had fallen asleep watching the morning bloom. Her face was peaceful, so peaceful that for a moment he almost smiled, thinking she was simply resting. Then he understood. He knelt beside her, his eyes filling with tears that came not only from grief but from gratitude. On her lap lay a small card, written in the same steady hand that had once signed away everything and later reclaimed it all. It read, "My darling boy, if you are reading this, it means my journey has ended, and yours must continue. Do not grieve too long, keep your promises, keep the flowers alive. Teach the children that forgiveness is a form of strength, and that silence is not peace. I have loved you through it all, even when you could not see it. Remember me, not for the battles I fought, but for the courage I found in learning to begin again." Kevin pressed the note to his chest. He stepped out onto the balcony, the morning sun warming his face. The flowers swayed, brushing against his hands, and he remembered her voice saying, "Justice is not loud. It is the quiet strength to stand again." He turned toward the same city that had once been cruel and now seemed filled with light, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. Weeks later, the community center held a memorial. People came from everywhere, neighbors, volunteers, families she had helped. They spoke not of her death, but of her life, of how she had taught them to listen, to speak, to stand. The new wing of the Alliance opened that day, a bright space filled with books and light. Above the entrance hung a simple plaque, "Eleanor's Light, for the woman who taught us that courage blooms quietly and never fades." And back at her apartment, on the little balcony above the street, the geraniums kept growing. Sarah and Emma came every week to water them, laughing, singing, telling stories. When the wind passed through the leaves, it carried the faintest sound, a whisper, soft and certain like a voice returning home. It said, "It is never too late, not for love, not for courage, not for peace." And the flowers, bright against the sky, seemed to nod in agreement, their petals open to the morning, blooming forever in the light she left behind.